Hi, I'm Kate Jinx, a programmer from NIF, and I'm delighted to be speaking to the filmmakers behind City So Real today. We've got the director Steve James and producer Zak Piper. Thanks for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Well, firstly, congratulations on such a thrilling documentary. It covers so much ground, and you're both dialing in from Chicago at the moment. Do you think this is kind of a love letter to a complex city?
I think we like that description. You know, as long as it's not completely blind love. You know, I think we feel like this film has a lot of grit and authenticity and the reality of Chicago, but ultimately we do love the city.
Yeah, it's not a mushy love letter. No, not at all.
No, it's a realistic love letter, if anything. Well, there's so much going on in the film. You've got the trial of Laquan McDonald, you've got the mayoral race, you've got this kind of growing unrest and very quickening gentrification. There's so much going on, but did you set out to capture any one of those things, or were you looking to capture the whole of Chicago when you first started?
Well, I think, you know, Steve's original idea was to follow the mayoral election, but we also knew that the Laquan McDonald murder trial was going to be happening. And there was a lot of nervousness and tension around that. And so that was an obvious thing to follow. I think as far as gentrification and some of the other issues in the film, the idea was sort of to look at all the different aspects of the city as much as possible, as much as, you know, that was realistic to capture, and to try to give, you know, to capture as many dimensions of the city as possible and make that part of this mosaic of the series, which is what we hoped it would be.
Yeah, and we also kind of let the stories take us where it took us. That was one of the sort of guiding principles of this film, and I think it's sort of preserved in the way in which it's put together, that when things came up that were unexpected, we would follow them where they took us. So like when the Alderman Burke is indicted, that became part of the story in a significant way because it was what was happening. Same with Lincoln Yards. You know, we didn't know that we were going to necessarily do anything with the Lincoln Yards development and the whole gentrification question, but it loomed so large, we just felt like it demanded to be a part of the film.
Well, Steve, I understand that Chris Marker is a bit of an inspiration for you with this film. You were particularly inspired by Le Jolie May from 1963. I was wondering if you could tell us kind of why and where that came from.
Well, it came from when I was in grad school many, many years ago and was first exposed to Chris Marker's work. And that was one of the films we watched. And I just remember at the time, it was part of making me really want to try documentary because I didn't go to school with the idea that I was going to be a documentary filmmaker. And I think what I loved about the film was that it was so free in its use of the documentary form to tell the story of the city of Paris at a particular moment, so that there were interviews on the street, there were verite scenes, there were poetic passages that looked like they could have been something that Cartier-Bresson had photographed. And I just love the fact that everything was okay, and it really kind of liberated my idea of what a documentary could be as someone studying film. And so it kind of got lodged in my mind. And then after being in Chicago for a number of years, I kept thinking about that film and thinking it would be great to try and do something like that in Chicago. And of course, I'm not Chris Marker, he's a poet. So, you know, he made what he made, we made what we made, but you certainly, I think, see some of that influence in City So Real.
Yeah, I love how observational it is. It does feel very free and full of surprises. Could you talk a little bit about an average shoot day? Was there an average shoot day for you?
There really wasn't an average shoot day, other than they were chaotic often, and we were chasing our tail sometimes, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 locations in one day. At a certain point there, especially around the election, as all the, you know, storylines for the candidates were coming to a head, you know, boy, the last 2 months were really intense, trying to follow those stories.
Did you have a meeting like in the morning of what you were going to shoot that day, or were you just all shooting on the fly?
Yes, we had a meeting around a table every morning with donuts, and no, not at all. We basically, it was a very small team for the most part. Like rarely was there more than two, and at the most three of us in the field at one time. We didn't have teams standing out across the city. And so a lot of it really was, we might start the day with one idea in mind of something we were going to get. And then it was sort of like, let's see what happens. And we would just let the story take us where it took us. I mean, Zak was really terrific about following social media and following the journalist daybook here in Chicago, which would, post things that were going on. And so we would oftentimes switch directions midstream. It would be like where we were going to go this place, and it was like, no, I don't think we're going to go there now. I think let's go here. And it was, at first it was a little disorienting, I think, for us, because we're used to having a bit more organization to our day. But it eventually was, I think, for all of us, really liberating and sort of exciting, to kind of, and freeing to kind of know that that we could do whatever we wanted, and whatever moved us during that day. We would encounter people, like the Uber driver, for example, Tracy, is a perfect example. She was just giving us a ride from one location to another. And we started talking to her with no intention of filming her. And she was so interesting that we said, hold on, do you mind if we film you? And she said, okay. And so I got in the front seat and we had this conversation with her. And that's a really, I think, powerful and moving part of the series that was completely unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, what a serendipitous moment for you as filmmakers to come across someone like her. That is such a kind of a generous moment of the film when she speaks about the issues she's been facing, and it's really surprising as a viewer to see her kind of switch so quickly. I can't imagine what it would be like as a documentary filmmaker, kind of capturing that. Is that what you're kind of looking for when you're shooting?
I think yes. I think, as documentary filmmakers, we live for surprising and real moments, regardless of the film. But this film especially applies here. We go out oftentimes with something in mind of what we want to get and what we think will be interesting to get. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes that doesn't happen. Something completely unexpected happens. Another good example is the South Side barber scene in the black barbershop. We went into that barbershop with the expectation of having the people in the shop talk about Harith Augustus, who was a barber there and who had been killed by the police in an altercation. That was the motivation to go into the barbershop. We did get that, but what really happened, which is what you see in the series, is this incredible conversation when a guy from the post office wandered in who'd never been to that barbershop before to get his hair cut, and they got into this incredible conversation about privilege as it relates to Black people, which is a really different kind of discussion about privilege than it is when it relates to white people. And it was just extraordinary and totally unexpected. And of course, that's what the scene ends up being about.
It's a really remarkable moment in the film. I mean, as white filmmakers in that space, how do you kind of gain the trust of the people that you are observing?
Well, in that particular situation, we had a diverse team. So we had two Black field producers. We had one of the DPs was Kevin Shaw, who is African-American. Actually, outside of Zak, the person that did the most sound in the field, because Zak is a producer who also records sound in the field. I think that's a unique thing for I don't know there's many teams that do that, have producers who record sound. But outside of Zak recording sound, which he did the vast majority, the person who recorded the most sound next to him was a Black sound recorder. So it just so happened for that day that we went in, it wasn't so happened, it was planned that way, that I was there, but the team otherwise was a Black production team, and I think that made a big difference. But you know, we have spent many times filming in situations where we are white filmmakers in situations of community of color, and you know, we've been doing it for years. You know, I think we've learned some things about how you get people to be willing to open up and share what they're thinking and feeling with us, and a lot of it has to do with just being we're curious, we're very open, we are very clear about what it is we're doing and why we're doing it, and people kind of make a decision that frequently that they support what we're trying to do and they want to be a part of it, and that's a key to that kind of candor.
Yeah, and just to add one thing, which is another part of that trust, is as part of the process of making this film, but basically all the films that we work on, you know, giving the folks who are in it a chance to see at least their scene, if not the whole film, before it's done, before the rest of the world sees it. So we reached out to most of the folks in the film.
It wasn't easy.
So it was not easy. It was, yes.
I bet.
Yes, and even like, you know, even 5-6 months later, because this was happening last fall, just like a month ago, someone finally returned a text, and so we sent the link over, and they were like, oh, great, you know. So eventually maybe we'll get everybody.
Great. Have you had anyone kind of veto their, you know, they see it and they don't like the way that they're portrayed, or have you not run into that yet?
Well, I mean, we've had struggles over the years with people feeling like their portrayal did not capture them accurately, and our promise to people in that situation, and we've made it good over the many years, is that we want to work with you. We want you to feel fairly portrayed and empathically portrayed. And we've made changes. We've made changes to help people feel better about the way we portrayed them. We don't hand over editorial control because journalistically that's problematic, but we have made a promise and we've kept our word that we really do want people to feel that they have been treated fairly and that this is how they feel and this is who they are. Because frankly, we hate it if people come away from this experience regretting that they were a part of this, because they feel like they were exploited or used or misrepresented, and that's the worst thing you could say to us. And part of that trust, and one of the things we have found over the years is that if people feel some agency in the process of the film that you're making, they are much more inclined to open up to you and to be honest with you than if they are feeling like they don't know if they can trust you.
Yeah, well, you have pretty incredible access to some of the candidates. I assume that some of the candidates did not give you such unprecedented access, but you have so much access to Laurie Lightfoot, who was not a front runner of the campaign when it started. Did you just think, she's interesting, let's follow her? Was that the impetus to kind of get in with her campaign team? Yeah,
Definitely. I mean, she was one of the early candidates, actually. She was one of the first candidates, not the first, but one of the first who threw her hat in the ring. There were 21 candidates total, so I'm not sure how many, I can't remember how many we follow in the series, but she was someone who kind of was in the background. I mean, there weren't really many polls that were done at the time, but eventually when a poll was done, she was polling around 2.5%. But she's someone in the process of the petition challenges, really emerged with a real clear voice and a real toughness that I think ultimately propelled her to victory. And even then it was still kind of like out of nowhere, because 3 weeks before the election she was still, I think, in 8th or 9th place. So, but all the various aspects of her personality too, the fact that she's a Black woman, LGBTQ, and yeah, just she's an interesting person.
And she's an example of a candidate that, as Zak's saying, has fascinated us. And she personally really liked the idea of what we were doing in this series. We explained to her, like, yes, we're following the election, but we're not just following the election, we're following the city as a whole and doing this portrait. And she really liked the idea of that. And we only wish that her press people liked it as much, because they were a hindrance, frankly, to us most of the time. But because Laurie liked it personally, we were able to circumvent them frequently and get the access that we needed with Laurie. And then, of course, the fact that she won, it was very fortuitous that we had been so persistent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't know that she had won when I was watching it, so it was such a revelation at the end. And I'm sure that kind of viewers all around the world will be having sort of staggered responses to that election.
Yeah, and I think that's true of a lot of people, I mean, especially outside the United States, but even, I mean, maybe not so much now because Laurie's profile has risen considerably due to the pandemic, but...
and her sparring with Trump, yeah.
Yeah, and sparring with Trump, very much so.
You capture so many things that were so unexpected about that race. The petition challenges were particularly eye-opening. The corruption is so blatant, and everyone just kind of understands that it's part of the race. I mean, can you talk about what you were trying to film when you were going into those back rooms and observing those meetings?
Just trying to understand the process.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I knew that the petition process was a key part of the political gamesmanship that went on there, but I had no idea the level to which it was until we went there. And we spent many days at the Board of Elections. Our joke is that we could have easily made a Frederick Wiseman film called Board of Elections, and that's, he's brilliant. That's what he would have done. He just would have done Board of Elections, and then that would have been the whole film. And it probably would have been as long as our film, but it would have been just Board of Elections. But the more we were there, the more I think fascinated we became with the absurdity of it, the Byzantine politics, the gamesmanship, and the way in which it kind of reflected Chicago politically. There's even a pride in all of that politician, this is a city which I think in many ways, it's a mistake. It takes tremendous pride in the fact that politics is a blood sport, and that love the fact that we're rough and tumble. And, that's good in a way because it makes you a tough politician and maybe a better leader, but it's also corrupt.
And it makes it more difficult for candidates who are serious candidates, but they don't have an infrastructure, the money to withstand challenges where they have to hire lawyers and they're paying thousands of dollars, just to stay on the ballot.
Yeah. I mean, you really see that with that one particular candidate, and when he goes to vote himself, that his press people have not told anyone that he's coming. You really feel for those candidates who are kind of the bootstraps candidates, really, aren't they? The film, it captures so much about a particular time in Chicago, and this has changed again during, what's happening at the moment with the Black Lives Matter movement and kind of growing unrest and demand for radically changing the system. At what point as filmmakers and as documentarians do you kind of switch off from the desire to document those things?
Well, we initially had to make a decision that we weren't going to follow the story past the election. And we made that decision because, the series primarily focuses on the first round even of the election, which was because we thought of it as it relates to politics as a kind of film about this sort of free-for-all of all of these very diverse candidates trying to become the next mayor of Chicago. Mm-hmm. And we kind of made a decision that once we had taken you through that in some detail, that a viewer would not want to sit through the runoff election in great detail. And I think we were right about that. And And so we kind of skipped to the end and Laurie's victory. But when the pandemic hit, Zak and I started, so the series was done basically.
And then in April, yeah.
Yeah, it was out on the festival circuit. It premiered at Sundance in January and played in several festivals and playing in your festival, which we're very excited about. And then the pandemic hit. And we kind of said, we think we may need to do some kind of postscript about the pandemic. So we went out and started to film and did stuff from home on computers, interviews and such, covering the pandemic. And then when the upheaval hit with George Floyd's murder, we've been full on. So we're making a whole other episode now, which will basically go forward about a year and be about Chicago as it grapples with the pandemic and all this upheaval. And it will be a very sober look at what it means to be the mayor of Chicago too, because Laurie Lightfoot has really got her work cut out for her.
That is great news. I cannot wait to see. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for your fantastic film. I cannot wait for the next installment.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking to you.